Hello, just a quick video. Just wanted to reply to something Scott Adams said about very rich people being the stewards of our hyperinflation, or kind of stewards of the money supply. As long as supply of money goes up because of printing and velocity stays low, then we won't experience hyperinflation. While this is technically true, I want to point out one or two things that maybe Scott hasn't anticipated and kind of complicate the picture, and why this will not work. Why velocity of money it moves up almost mechanically. So when every rich person has all of this money, the idea being that it's not only the quantity of money in the economy, it's also the velocity at which it travels. So how many times that dollar changes hands every year. Scott Adams posits that since rich people have much lower cash needs, they won't spend the money as much, and as long as they essentially are spendthrifts, then they can keep the velocity of money low and our economy won't experience hyperinflation. It's true that if each rich person put money under their mattress forever, that would be the effect of removing dollars from the money supply, and essentially you would just lower the supply. The Fed would print money and rich people would be keeping them under their mattress, and while on paper they'd be richer, in practice they'd be removing those dollars from the money supply. The problem with this idea is that every year the Fed shoots for 2% inflation. Everyone kind of builds inflation into their models, into their return models, into how much money they expect to have in the future for retirement. So if the Fed's shooting for 2% inflation, sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower, there's a huge pressure for people who have a ton of cash, $100,000 in cash, to put that into some kind of investment, whether that is a house, whether that is the stock market, maybe it's gold, maybe it's ammo, maybe it's a business. The whole point is that if you don't do that, at the end of the year, that $100,000 will be $98,000 in purchasing power. So you'd still have $100,000, but only have the purchasing power of $98,000, and so on, forever. So, theoretically, 50 years from now, your money would be almost nothing. So just keep that in mind. What rich people generally tend to do because of this is they go into other assets. So the stock market's really popular, S&P 500 funds, real estate's extremely popular because of the tax benefits, stuff like that. So this has the effect of pushing asset prices up. And again, just to be more, just to get Scott's point a little bit more, rich people cannot really be a steward of our economy and can't really prevent hyperinflation. If we are to get hyperinflation, because they live on a human time scale, and they're faced with this, it's a prisoner's dilemma. If you are the only one keeping your money under the mattress, you're going to suffer from the hyperinflation, and your money's going to be gone in no time. So there's always this rush to get in first. So I have to buy stocks this year before they go up, because who doesn't think the stock market or real estate will be higher in 5 years than it will be today? So on any kind of human time scale, there's this prisoner's dilemma to get your money into these assets, which forces the assets up, which we recognize as inflation. So just wanted to throw that out to Scott Adams. One way this might work, though, is things that don't operate on a human time scale. So large corporations and countries. So there's a huge demand internationally for U.S. dollars, because every other currency is much worse than the U.S. dollar right now. No one trusts the Chinese government to, respect their currency if it was against their national interest. No one expects, the euro to respect, trillions of dollars in deposits if it came to that. They would raise taxes, and Cyprus was a good example of that. So everyone's transacting US dollars, everyone wants to stockpile US dollars, so it is possible for countries and large corporations to buy up these dollars and just sit on them, which would have the same effect as of removing them from the money supply. So the Fed will print them, use them for domestic bailouts, use them to give resources to domestic people, and then foreign countries might buy them up and kind of sit on them forever, or at least forever as it pertains to a human time scale. So just keep that in mind. The only problem with that is that the international system can only go so long, or only will go so long, absorbing U.S. inflation before it decides to move to something else, whether that is an international basket of currencies, which is probably most likely, or whether that's gold, which may happen within our lifetimes. So just keep that in mind. There is no free lunch. Everything, people might be willing to deal with American inflation for now, and for the last 50 years, but realistically, at some point, it's going to, if we ramp up inflation and keep on printing up trillions and trillions of dollars, the world is going to move to something else. By the way, it's not just a monetary phenomenon. Other countries don't like the fact that we have this payment system. It makes the United States much more powerful than our competitors, like let's say China. China doesn't like the fact that the US has this incredibly powerful payment system. And, for example, Europe doesn't like the fact that we use it as a weapon, saying, well, we'll cut you out of, international payment system if you, violate, sanctions on Iran. Or if you do this foreign policy we don't like, we're going to use our payment system against you. Other countries don't like that. So they don't like using the dollar. It's just by far, the best currency out there. So there are some non-monetary things you have to consider, and every country's already trying to get out of using this dollar system. There's just not a good alternative. But as we print more money and as we inflate, again, that's eating away at what's going on. Lastly, I want to keep this short, so there's a higher chance that Scott Adams sees this. Just keep in mind, it does take years usually for this kind of thing to hit the economy. It's something, there's many different ways economists, they build different models, they have different names for it, but essentially the people who get the money first in any economy will get to spend at the regular purchasing power, because that money hasn't entered into the system yet. And it takes years for excess money to actually flow throughout the system. So we might not see this hyperinflation for 2 years, And by the way, hyperinflation depends on how you count it. So 5% inflation a year, that's pretty hyper. And again, we are already seeing hyperinflation in a lot of the goods and services we buy. The stock market, way higher than it should be based on any historical valuations. Same thing with real estate, same thing with gold, same thing with, bonds, same thing with, college tuition, same thing with healthcare. When you look at all of these different fields, everything is essentially increasing at, is going up. Everything's more expensive for young people than it was, 40 years ago. And even things like, even in the same house, so even things that aren't improving, right? You could say like, well, our medical care is better, so that's why it costs more. But even things that are the same, like a house or a gym membership, all of these things have increased in price. In fact, a lot of the consumer goods that have stayed the same, or maybe there's a little bit of inflation on a bag of chips, or chips get smaller but the price stays the same, so you have shrinkflation. A lot, like Coca-Cola is dramatically improving their technology all the time to become more efficient at producing and distributing Coke products. The reason the price stays the same is because a lot of those gains are eaten up by inflation. So it's not just the inflation you see, it's also the technological improvements which would naturally drive prices down that you don't see. So classic thing is cell phones. Every year cell phones get much better, and the technology for producing them and creating them gets better. And so there's the same phone with the same processing power and camera from 8 years ago is going to be much cheaper today. Might even be free if you sign a contract with a carrier. So it's just one of those things. Technological advance should increase an American's purchasing power, but a lot of times, even in consumer goods, it just stays the same, and you get a little bit of inflation, but not a ton. But all of those gains disappear, and that's something that's not really captured in the price index. So just want to shoot that out to Scott Adams. You're on the right track, but realistically, there is no free lunch. There is no way that printing these trillions of dollars isn't gonna come back to bite us. Even if it's just transferring all that money to the 1%. It's not great when we give a small part of our economy so much more control. That dilutes the purchasing power of, it drives up asset prices. And when I talk about asset prices, the reason it's so toxic is that when the S&P 500 is more expensive today than it was 10 years ago, that means someone who's just coming up, someone who's 25 or 35, their purchasing power per hour of their labor is worth much less of the stock market. They get way lower returns on their labor, which makes it very difficult for young people to make it, far more difficult than our parents or our grandparents. So, if you're looking at percentages, we have a lot more advantages, a lot more technology that they didn't have, but at the same time, a house 20 years ago where I live was 100,000. Right now it's 350,000. It's not because the house changed. It's because you know, it's because of inflation. Anyways, have a great day. I hope this helped. Bye.